Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to be taking a look at Lady of the Scales, the newest variant of Mercedes. And just a spoiler alert, you guys, although a lot of you guys probably thought that she was going to be more DPS or damage oriented, this actually isn't the case, though I still think that her kit is pretty interesting. Without further ado though, let's break down everything you need to know about Lady of the Scales Mercedes. Now, to start things off, yes, her animations and everything about her does look pretty cool. However, as you're seeing on screen right now, she is a light soul weaver, and that comes with a couple things of concern and also interest regarding her stats. Now, in terms of her actual stat line, yes, she is pretty quick for a soul weaver. She has 117 base speed, but she does also have 30 effect resistance built into her kit, which is pretty interesting. Now, notably, as well, as we move to her imprints, she does have self-imprint of effect resistance alongside team-wide effect resistance as well, which is always well appreciated. But let's now move to her skill 2, because it is pretty significant, all things considered. Now, this skill is pretty loaded. At the start of the battle, it first grants offering to the foremost ally, and when the ally that has offering dies, it recovers the health of all allies by 50%. This is obviously huge, because 50% of any character's health, especially when you are a tank character, is pretty ridiculous. However, to add to this, when combat readiness of an enemy increases during battle, Mercedes effectively steals or copies half of the amount of the copy or the combat readiness that you otherwise would have received and gives it to herself, which is absolutely ridiculous. Now, to be clear, this effect will not be applied to the combat readiness increase effect triggered by the same skill, which makes sense. However, to kind of tie everything together, you may be wondering what offering is, and this is actually a unique effect that reads that it grants 70% damage sharing from the damage received by all allies, and upon receiving lethal damage, you grant immortality for 1 turn. Now, even though immortality can only be activated once per battle, this effectively means that whoever you put in the front, unless if they get stripped, is going to sit there and soak a ton of damage. And again, especially if you're not fighting against a team that has strips or some sort of debuff or buff removal, rather, in some shape or form, it effectively makes them way more annoying and kind of in the category of a Bloodblade Karen, a Janua, or even worse, a tank that just can't die, which I suspect is how most players will end up using Lady of the Scales, at least once she releases. Now, beyond skill 2, she also has a pretty impactful skill 3, and with it, it reads that you dispel all debuffs from all allies while increasing combat readiness push by, I believe this should be 25%. However, in order to do so, you have to consume 20% of the current health of the ally granted offering, and this will then transform or provide abundance, which is another effect, to all other allies for 2 turns. Now, you already are familiar with what offering is. However, abundance is effectively just fixed damage, as you may be familiar with characters like the gosh, I can't even remember, ML Sharoon and characters like this at this point. God, there's so many characters that give additional damage. However, as you're reading right here, it says that after attacking, it inflicts 2,000 additional damage on the target. As far as I could tell, I'm not entirely sure right now if this is fixed damage, if additional damage is a different kind of damage source, or if it's affected, or what exactly it's affected by. Perhaps it's just affected by the same defenses, multipliers, and damages that every other character or every other damage source has to deal with, and it's not a fixed absolute value. However, regardless, adding additional damage and cleansing all in the same turn while also giving combat readiness push is pretty insane, honestly. And again, even if you're consuming 20% of the current health of the ally that has offering, again, because of the way that offering works and the fact that you have immortality, this will probably not be as crazy or as insane as you may think it actually is. Now, beyond this, we finally have skill 1, which I actually think is going to be one of the most slept on but insane abilities of Lady of the Scales Mercedes. And this reads that first you attack the enemy with Divine Lightning, and you have a 75% chance to inflict fear for 1 turn before recovering health of all allies proportional to the target's max HP. Now, this is yet another ability that is kind of loaded. Now, even before we get to what the implications of having fear and healing is, you should know that the Soulburn effect for this ability is that you increase the effect to 100% and it becomes AoE, though of course it can't trigger a dual attack, but who cares in this case. Now, in case you're unfamiliar with what fear is, the debuff fear specifically does not allow you to act for a certain number of turns. However, at the start of the turn, you have a 40% chance to dispel this debuff. Now, similar to characters like Mort, where this is super annoying, and honestly, it's a bit RNG on both the Mort and the enemy side. It is still really insane and crazy depending on how likely or how reliable applying this debuff is. Now, before we even get into that though, I do want to say that based on her kit and the way that she's going to be drafted, there's a good chance that you're going to use a character like Lady of the Scales Mercedes against low effect resistance characters, as she seems more anti-cleavy or slower in terms of play, though of course cleavers may end up using this. And with this, the ability to fear an entire team is crazy, because again, it's a 75% chance. But even though you may need effectiveness in order to land this, even if you aren't slotting in or kitting in for the effectiveness here, being able to recover the health of all allies is pretty insane. And again, attacking all enemies or having a more reliable source of healing on a character that already heals 50% when the front row character ends up dying is pretty ridiculous in terms of sustain. Now, just in terms of what's being shown and in terms of the sort of compositions that they've shown here, yes, I have to admit that even though you technically have to still deal with things like evasion, and even though this is maybe not the most one-for-one insane character that we've ever seen, her kit is inarguably kind of stuffed with a lot of things that are quite concerning. Now, again, if the immortality and the inability for the front row character to die wasn't a concern, well, stacking or the potential for something like that passive to stack with Bloodblade Karen and her having, I don't know, like 11 different immortality debuffs is already annoying by itself. And as you guys are probably suspecting and likely expecting with the way that they kind of positioned or they described the whole front line, front ally positioning thing, yes, this is probably going to be a character where if you pair this with someone like Arunka, you may never actually end up killing the Arunka, and she may end up just continuously countering you into infinity and beyond. Now, of course, there are some other practical usages for this character, and that includes things like anytime that the enemy ends up combat radius pushing or things to this effect, she may actually end up being in a super annoying kind of AoE healing sustain bot. And although again she isn't the most, I guess tanky character in the entire world, because again she is a soul weaver, the fact that you can pair her alongside a frontline tank that again will share a lot of the damage in a super Aureus type effect, it does effectively mean that Lady of the Scales Mercedes is going to be way more annoying to deal with just in terms of tank. Now, I do also want to point out that of course in this modern day of epicseven, and as we saw through content like the E7 World Cup, being able to accommodate for or being a character that can be used against both cleave and anti-cleave is important. And although I think some other characters may be a bit more 50-50 or a bit more questionable when it comes to this, I think that at base alone, just the fact that you can steal or copy or clone some of the effect, or rather the combat readiness effects from a cleave team with this character already makes her pretty insane. And again, as you're seeing on screen and as they've kind of teased and previewed here, yes, it does kind of feel like she is going to be really crazy with characters that are able to run Holy Sack or that are reverse cleave feeling, and that includes characters like the Yulha and the Crow. However, ultimately, guys, I do think that the character, even without the kind of the super anti, I guess, one shot or reverse one shot, even though this is the case, I don't think she necessarily has to play off of that, as again, she has a lot in her kit that already makes her feel kind of insane. Again, to be more specific, the healing, the additional damage that she has in her kit, alongside again just being able to overall provide a decent debuff in the form of fear against enemies that aren't socketed in or that don't end up building effect resistance, does make her quite scary. And as you're seeing on screen right now, despite even having only 18,000 HP, assuming that she has the ability to cleanse, or assuming that, again, if you do end up using her with a character like Arya, she does have more effect resistance, she's actually quite the threat. And I am pretty curious about how they'll end up taking or building this character, or how players will end up building this character in the future. As far as I can tell, though, I think that people will either slot into a primarily high effect resistance build, or just give her 100 effect resistance with, I don't know, a stupid amount of HP alongside speed. However, I could also see people that try to maybe, I guess, build some effectiveness into this character's kit so that you can more reliably land a fear. But in any case, I think that this is going to be a slower character. I think she looks pretty amazing. And overall, again, I am pretty excited and a big fan of the way that her design looks. Thanks again for watching, though, everyone. I apologize, as I know this is a bit late and I might have rambled a little bit. But yeah, I woke up and forgot that this preview was today. Anyways, I'll see you guys all in the next one. Stay safe, stay healthy. Good night.